The proceeding.
Order, order. Carolyn Lucas to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rees. It's a real pleasure to serve with you in the chair and to open today's debate on biodiversity loss. It's now less than 6 months until COP16 takes place in Colombia, the first summit since the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework was agreed in 2022, where countries committed to, and I quote, halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030. Now, that meeting in 6 months' time will be a crucial opportunity for global leaders to demonstrate how they are delivering on the commitments to restore our depleted natural world. And it's a moment for our own government to step up as well. Remember that when the then Secretary of State gave her statement to Parliament following the Kunming meeting, she promised to make this a decade of action. And yet, what have we actually seen since then? Well, raw sewage continues to pour into our waterways, including for more than 4 million hours last year, according to the Environment Agency statistics. Repeated so-called emergency approvals of neonicotinoids, a poison so powerful that a single teaspoon is enough to kill 1.25 billion bees. And just this weekend, it was reported that the government is poised to row back on their commitment to ban the sale of horticultural peat this year, seemingly content to see precious peatlands further degrade. It is hardly a reassuring picture.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and I absolutely agree with what she's saying. She mentions, though, COP16. And, of course, in Colombia later on this year, the world will meet for the Biodiversity Conference there, which is of critical importance. She will be aware that Colombia was one of those countries that have actually moved beyond gas and oil. The Beyond Gas and Oil Alliance they have joined up to. And yet our government, a similar-sized oil and gas producer, has not. Does she believe that one of the things that we should be doing before the Biodiversity COP is actually to join Colombia in the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance?
Caroline Lucas.
Well, I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and of course I agree wholeheartedly. It's something that I'll come to in a moment in my speech, but the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance doesn't mean to say that you end oil and gas tomorrow. It's a commitment over time, and it sends out a massively important signal to the rest of the world, and frankly the fact that we haven't signed up to that, I think, tells its own story, unfortunately. The State of Nature report published last year once more shone a spotlight on the horrifying decline, or actually let's call it what it actually is, on the wanton destruction of biodiversity across our 4 nations, meaning that in that well-worn formulation, the UK is indeed now one of the most nature-depleted countries on Earth. In the course of my lifetime alone, the abundance of species studied across the UK has fallen by almost 20% on average, meaning that just half of animals, insects and plants that we're privileged to share our home with now remain. From the mosses and the lichens on our woodlands to the internationally important seabird populations that breed on the cliffs and rocky islands of the coastline. This is a disaster so extreme that it is frankly hard to contemplate. Imagine if we lost half our population, for example, or if half the country was swallowed by the sea, or half the country's financial wealth was squandered. Yet seemingly with few regrets, we've sacrificed half our natural inheritance. Scientists are now warning of what they term acoustic fossils as the natural world falls silent, and once familiar sounds like the dawn chorus grow quiet or are lost altogether. It could not be clearer that nature is in freefall, and without urgent action to not just halt, but reverse its decline, then species risk being lost forever from our skies, our lands and waters. And that's not only a disaster for the individual species concerned, including my favourite bird, the swift, which in the course of its lifetime can fly an extraordinary 1 million miles.
On that point, would she give way? She is absolutely right to raise the situation of migratory birds. And just one tiny glimmer of hope. Within Innis Entley, at Bardsey Island in my constituency, we have Europe's first and only dark sky sanctuary since last year. One of the key actions was replacing the bright white light of the lighthouse with a red light, whereby saving thousands of birds' lives. In one night, 2,000 birds died previously. We must acknowledge those little glimmers of hope while also recognising the larger picture and its seriousness.
Caroline Lucas.
Well, I thank the Honourable Member for that really inspiring intervention, and it does show that actually incredibly simple things can make a world of difference. And actually, I'm anticipating an intervention in just a moment on one of my favourite subjects, which is Swift brick, so I will, I will anticipate that intervention.
And she is absolutely right to talk about some species being lost by 50%. Indeed, one of her favourite birds is the swift. For just £30, a swift brick could be installed in new build properties. Swift populations declined by 60% over the last 30 years. Why, can I ask the Minister, are we not legislating for such a simple way to protect the swift population?
Caroline Lucas.
Well, as he knows, I could not agree more with the Honourable Member. And I remember being, as he was, in this room for that debate in Westminster Hall last year, talking about the importance of something as simple as a swift brick, and hearing the Minister basically going through gymnastics trying to explain why it was not going to be possible to do it, because it's not even £30 that the government has to spend. If it's put into the buildings when they're properly built in the first place, it's a tiny amount of money that the developers would have to spend. So what we're saying to the Minister is essentially that there is a whole raft of actions that need to be taken, but some are incredibly simple, and could she please start to take on some of those actions too? Because I was saying that the loss of biodiversity isn't only a tragedy for the species involved, it's a disaster for us too. The world is a lonelier place for human beings when the species that we've been privileged to share it with are reducing on a daily basis. And if you wanted to measure it in economic terms, then a recent report found that biodiversity loss could cause a larger hit to the UK's economy in the years ahead than either the 2008 financial crisis or indeed the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, of course it could, because the bottom line is that our well-being is intimately and inextricably bound up with the well-being of nature. We are nature, and it's the false perception of a division between human beings and the rest of the world, that mechanistic assumption that the natural world is something for us to use rather than to live alongside, that I believe is at the root of so much of the ecological crisis around us. Just one small example, Lawyers for Nature have started, I think, a really inspiring campaign to change the definition of nature in the Oxford English Dictionary so that it includes humans, because currently all dictionaries actually exclude humans from their definition. Words matter. Highlighting our connection and interdependence with nature matters, and it needs to lead to action. So while the government has made welcome commitments at a global level, including to manage 30% of the land and sea for nature by 2030. And at home, the 2021 Environment Act has set legally binding targets, notably, of course, to end the decline in species populations by 2030. We all know that it's not just the setting of targets that matters, it is the delivery of them. And the latest assessment from the Office for Environmental Protection has been damning on that front, warning that the prospect of meeting key targets and commitments are, in their words, largely off track. Dame Glenys Stacey, chair of the OEP, goes on to say that it is deeply, deeply concerning, her words, about that the adverse environmental trends are continuing. A statement which is underlined, really, by the evidence of our rivers and our seas being polluted with a cocktail of chemicals and effluent, ancient woodlands being bulldozed to make way for roads or railways, and our fields doused in pesticides and fungicides. Our only home is on fire and being bulldozed before our eyes. And as the State of Nature reports, there are two primary factors which are driving this decline on land: climate change and our intensive agriculture system. And it's on these that I'll focus the rest of my remarks. Because when it comes to our climate, rising temperatures are causing major changes in the natural world, leading to range shifts, population changes, and disruption of precious food webs. And while species that are well adapted to the warmth are likely to keep expanding across the UK, montane species, which are already on the edge of their ranges, will tragically be squeezed out. More broadly, nesting birds will be increasingly mismatched with peaks in invertebrate food sources. So we'll see, for example, more blue-tit chicks starving because the caterpillars on which they depend are no longer available. At sea, primary and secondary plankton production is likely to be shifted northwards. There was widespread alarm at the extreme marine heat wave last year, which saw, off the coast of the UK, seas reaching up to a horrifying 5 degrees centigrade above normal. Species which have adapted over thousands of years simply can't keep up with this perilous, high-speed experiment that we're conducting. The IPCC's 6th assessment report from Working Group 2 showed that climate change is already causing dangerous and widespread disruption in nature. So at the very least, we need to stop pouring fuel on the fire. No new oil and gas licenses, and certainly no new coal mines. I'm deeply concerned that the government has not only issued licenses for oil and gas projects inside our marine protected areas, making a mockery of that designation, but it's also been ignoring objections from the Joint Nature Conservation Committee to new licenses on environmental grounds as well. Ministers need to rapidly speed up the transition to net zero rather than delaying action in a desperate attempt to stoke a climate culture war. We need to be working with nature to tackle this crisis, creating woodland, planting seagrass meadows, re-wetting peatlands, so we not only restore vital habitats, we lock away carbon as well. According to the RSPB, these vital carbon sinks currently contain 2 gigatons of carbon. That's the equivalent to 4 years of the UK's annual emissions. And yet, not only is 2/3 of this store unprotected, much of it is already damaged and degraded. And, unforgivably, it continues to be destroyed, with the government abjectly failing to deliver a complete ban on peat burning, which continues to be set alight each year, simply so that a wealthy minority can engage in grouse shooting. If you needed a definition of absurdity, that, Ms. Rees, would be one of them. We need to see an end to that devastating practice and real investment in nature-based solutions which remain chronically underfunded. And that should include a significant uplift to the Nature for Climate Fund. And I hope that the opposition will urgently commit to renew it as well if it forms the next government. When it comes to food production, our modern agricultural system, with its industrial processes, use of chemicals and monoculture fields stretching as far as the eye can see, is one of the main causes of biodiversity loss. It's being driven by economic pressures and misguided views of so-called progress that take a huge toll on farming communities and ecosystems alike. It's been described by author and farmer James Rebanks as like being sucked into a whirlpool, slowly becoming exhausted, in an effort to keep up with so-called modern practices, while supermarkets squeeze profits to an extent that often make it nigh on impossible to make profit. Yet with farmers managing 70% of the land in England, they have a vital role to play in addressing the climate and nature crises, with the OEP observing that the government will not achieve its ambitions without effective management of the farmed landscape. But as it stands, the government's environmental land management scheme is failing both nature and farmers. First, the current structure of the sustainable farming incentive is leading to a pick-and-mix approach, which risks directing funding into a very narrow range of low-impact actions. Second, farmers aren't being supported to enter the higher-tier schemes, with 1 in 5 of those that applied for the Countryside Stewardship higher tier last year actually being turned away, including because of a lack of resourcing and an absence of a transition pathway for the thousands of farmers in previous agri-environment schemes who now risk missing out. And third, there is a gaping gap in minimum environmental protections, including for watercourses, soil and hedgerows, now that the cross-compliance regulations have come to an end and it's not clear what's going to replace them. So ELMS must be urgently reformed with a clear plan for how each scheme will deliver on the UK's environmental targets and a proper regulatory baseline established. Government must deliver a pay rise for nature by doubling the annual budget for nature-friendly farming and land management. Going beyond that, we need a transformational shift to agroecological ways of farming, so food is produced in harmony with nature, including properly incentivising the transition away from harmful pesticides, fungicides and herbicides. And I hope that Labour will also look again at their proposals for how we grow our food, because simply committing to make ELMS work falls short of setting out how the farming budget must be allocated if we're to both restore the natural world and produce healthy and nutritious food in the context of a climate and nature emergency. At sea, we urgently need a ban on industrial fishing in all marine protected areas. The current approach is far too slow and too piecemeal to adequately respond to nature's decline. And finally, we must not only protect our most important sites, but also create new habitats and ensure that planning policy at land and sea properly takes nature into account. Despite sites of special scientific interest being apparently the crown jewels of the UK's nature network, many are in poor or declining condition. According to a recent health check, just 6% of the total land area of our national parks is actually currently managed effectively for nature. Across the country, this figure reduces to as little as 3% of land and 8% of English seas being well protected for nature, highlighting the enormous gulf to delivering the 30 by 30, regardless of warm words that we hear from ministers. If we're to have any chance of restoring nature and achieving our targets, then protected landscapes can no longer just be paper parks, but they must be thriving ecosystems bursting with life. So the designated sites network should be strengthened, expanded, funding increased, and crucially targeted towards biodiversity regeneration. And there should be a new statutory purpose for national parks and landscapes, formerly AONBs, to support nature's recovery. I welcome the proposal from the Wildlife and Countryside Link for a 30 by 30 rapid delivery project to ensure that goal is delivered in less than 6 years' time. We need to see better resourcing too for arm's-length bodies like Natural England. It's been called for just this week by the CEOs of leading nature charities to ensure that they can do their job for our critical assets and effectively advise government. And lastly, we need to see more connectivity across landscapes, with nature's decline being also driven by the fact that those places that do exist for wildlife being too small and too fragmented. And a brilliant model of how this can be done has been shown by the hugely exciting Wheel to Waves project, which aims to create a 100-mile nature recovery corridor going from the Sussex Kelp Recovery Project near Brighton to the Ashdown Forest, and with the Knepp estate at its heart. And I know many of us will have visited the Knepp rewilding project and heard the gentle purr of the turtle dove and the nightingale's song. The Green Party believes we need to go further and would introduce a new Rights of Nature bill to recognise that ecosystems have their own rights and to give a voice to nature in law, enforced by a new independent commission for nature, so that regeneration of nature is at the heart of all policy considerations. And we need to look again at an economic model that is based on ever-increasing extractive GDP growth as its overriding goal, rather than promoting a thriving natural world and increased well-being for all of us. As the Dasgupta review urged, we need a change in what he called how we think, act and measure economic success so we protect and enhance our prosperity and the natural world.
Thank the honourable member for giving way and congratulate her on the debate. Just on economic issues, would you agree with me that in the economic pact for today's debate, what is extremely frustrating is there is an indication that public expenditure and non-government spending on UK biodiversity is increasing in the past few years, and yet despite that, many of the problems are persisting and some of them getting worse, in spite of the fact that there's increasing expenditure on the problem that seems to be getting worse.
Lucas.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and I suppose that simply demonstrates that more resourcing is a necessary but not sufficient component of what we need to see here. We need a far more joined-up approach to the natural world, and I would argue in particular, as I have done, that the farming system and our food system is absolutely integral to making that properly connected. Ms Rees, I'm aware of time, so I'm going to draw my comments to a close, but in doing so, I simply wanted to return very briefly to our international commitments. As the Minister knows, countries must publish national biodiversity strategy and action plans ahead of the next UN Biodiversity Summit in Colombia. The UK's plan is expected to contain 4 individual country strategies for each of the 4 nations, as well as strategies for the UK overseas territories and Crown dependencies. It's also understood that this could be published and adopted very soon, but concerningly, there are rumours that the country strategy for England could simply be a repetition of the Environmental Improvement Plan. Let me be very clear that this move would be totally unacceptable, given the widespread criticism that the EIP has received, including from the Office of Environmental Protection. So in closing, I've asked many things of the ministers, but I want to summarise 3 in particular that I hope she will address in her summing up. First, can she confirm today that the government will publish a bold, coordinated and well-resourced plan with concrete steps to deliver on our international commitments ahead of that key meeting in Colombia? And can she rule out the idea that it will just simply be for England a reiteration of the Environmental Improvement Plan? I hope the government will also bring the global commitment to reverse nature loss by 2030 into UK law And that's a move that would be delivered by a new climate and nature bill. And thirdly, can she outline what will replace the cross-compliance rules? Can she urgently indicate how that gap will be filled? It is easy to feel overwhelmed, Ms. Rees, by nature's horrifying decline, yet it is entirely possible to reverse this picture and ensure that our children inherit an earth which is just as rich and vibrant as the one that we once knew, where habitats are restored and biodiversity blooms. But to do so, we need to take urgent steps now, not only to protect what remains, but to work to create new wild spaces and to finally recognise that we are nature. And what we do to the natural world, we ultimately do to ourselves.
Thank you. May I remind members that they should bob if they wish to be called to speak in the debate. I intend to start the wind-ups at 10:25 to allow Ms Lucas a couple of minutes at the end to sum up. So if members stick to about maybe 3 minutes as an informal guide, we should get everyone in. So the question is that this House has considered biodiversity loss. I call Teresa Villiers.
Thank you, Mrs Rees. It's great to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate the member for Brighton Pavilion on securing a debate on this important issue, and where I absolutely agree with the member for Brighton Pavilion is the protection of nature and wildlife is not some nice-to-have optional extra. From pollinators that enable us to grow our crops, to marine life that provides us with our most popular national dish, to the trees that help us breathe easily in towns and cities, biodiversity is vital for our survival and our prosperity. And as we've heard this morning, it's also vital for reaching net zero. If we're to have any chance of becoming carbon neutral, we do need to be planting millions of trees and re-wetting our peatlands and allowing habitats to thrive in many more places than they are at the moment. And of course, natural spaces also play a hugely important part in our happiness, our well-being, our health. They're in many ways what makes life worth living. And that's one of the reasons why I've always fought to conserve these green spaces in my Chipping Barnet constituency. And I know a huge amount of effort is underway to reverse the decline in the natural environment that we've been hearing about this morning. Much of this is in the Environment Act, which I was proud to introduce to Parliament. And the 2030 target for halting species loss is hugely important. The Environment Act also includes the toughest rules ever to bear down on pollution of our rivers and waterways, and measures to rid supply chains of illegal deforestation, to transform our waste and recycling system, and also to crack down on litter and fly tipping, which can so often defile our green and natural spaces and habitats. Whilst at DEFRA, I also brought forward the Agriculture Act to Parliament, ending the Common Agricultural Policy and replacing it with ELM schemes to support farmers to protect and enhance habitats. Yeah, I acknowledge the points made by the honourable member for Brighton Pavilion, but I do think, despite its drawbacks, it is one of the most important and far-reaching nature protection measures that has ever been adopted by this country, not least because it opens up such a long, ongoing source of significant funding for protection of nature. And, of course, the additional exit from the European Union has also enabled us to introduce additional protections for the marine environment, most recently to ban the fishing of sand eels in the North Sea, which is a significant boost to our puffin population. Our overseas territories make us custodians of one of the largest marine estates in the world, and we are taking truly world-leading action, protecting an area of ocean larger than India, and also, just in January, protecting a further 166,000 square kilometres around South Georgia and the South Sandwich Island. But despite this action, of course, there is still a huge amount to do if we are to meet that 2030 target on nature and, of course, the 2050 target on carbon. We need every part of government to play its part in delivering on these two crucial environmental challenges, and I'd urge ministers to consider supporting my bill to ban the sale of horticultural peat in the amateur gardening sector. I would also urge that tree planting rates are scaled up dramatically. We must also do all we can to prevent litter and fly tipping, choking our natural spaces. And we also need to protect the green belt from Labour plans to bulldoze it. Thank you, Mrs Rees.
I call Alistair Stratton.
Thank you, Ms Rees. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship today. I want to congratulate and thank the Honourable Member for Brighton Pavilion for securing a really important debate. I'm proud to represent a particularly beautiful part of our country with, I think, some of the best countryside Britain has to offer in mid-Bedfordshire. We take great pride in it across our communities with fantastic local conservation groups, charities and actually some brilliant work by local parish councils to cherish and really look after the very best of British countryside. And our farmers play their part too, with its nurturing world-famous shallot fields at Clifton Berry Farms, pioneering regenerative farm techniques at Southhill Estates, or rearing fantastic livestock at Browns of Stagdon. Our farmers are real unsung heroes of so much of what makes Bedfordshire special. However, the sad reality is in so many ways these groups are being let down, and our countryside is being let down too. The last 14 years have seen a devastating decline in our biodiversity and local environments. Our rivers alone have seen 778 sewage spills in the past year, and our farmers have been let down by a broken economic and policy settlement. The failure to deliver schemes like ELMs and wider support measures at scale mean that all too often they can't access the support and funding they need to take care of the countryside they so desperately want to look after. It should fall up to all of us in this room today and across Parliament to take ownership of addressing this issue and ensure we finally act with the urgency that the nature crisis our country is facing demands. Because under this government's watch, we risk becoming one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world. And that, to all of us, should be a scandal. And it's one with wide-ranging consequences too. Communities who've seen cherished nature that's been the backdrop to their lives for generations diminished. Farmers worrying about what the decline of their fragile ecosystems will mean for the future of their business and their much-loved countryside. And even hard-nosed financial institutions across the city waking up to the very real risk that nature risk poses now to our economy as our great natural assets are eroded. The shocking, I think, report from the Office for Environmental Protection that has already been mentioned today should be an urgent call to action for all of us to redouble our efforts and to make sure that those commitments are lived up to and exceeded. And that's why I'm proud that Labour has really underlined our commitment to meeting those targets, to redoubling efforts to make sure we can halt the decline of nature in Britain and species decline by 2030, and to ensure we meet and live up to our international commitments and protect 30% of the UK's land and sea for nature by 2030. There'll be a lot of levers that need to be pulled to make this happen. We'll make sure that we finally get a land use framework in effect, allowing us to promote sustainable regenerative farming, meet our climate goals and strengthen ecosystems. And we'll take robust action to hold water companies to account, introducing tough action to stop bonus payments for pollution and ensure that bosses who continue to oversee law breaking will face criminal action. Because the last 14 years have shown a sickening decline in the quality of our waterways right across the country, with not a single river in England rated as in good health. How on earth can we expect natural life to thrive in such a toxic environment? And while this government and Parliament continues to stagger on, I'd urge ministers to put this time to use. I know the parliamentary schedule can get crowded with multiple reset moments, but this really matters. So I'd urge the Minister to commit today to finally bringing forward the land use framework in this Parliament, to making sure we finally bring forward legislation and action on the water exec bonuses, and to make sure we finally deliver every penny available in ELMs and wider nature for climate funding to the farmers that desperately need it to look after our countryside. If they're not up for that, Ms Rees, it will fall to the next government to act. And I'm proud to be part of a party that has a proud history of conservation, from setting up our natural parks to opening up our coastal paths and passing the world's first legislation to tackle climate change. Labour has a lot to be proud of. And should we be asked again at the next election by the British people, Labour stand ready to serve our countryside once again.
Thank you, Ms Rees, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for Brighton Pavilion for introducing this important debate to this chamber. Across the globe, Ms Rees, nature is collapsing. The UK has lost nearly half of its biodiversity since the Industrial Revolution. We are ranked in the bottom 10% for nature loss and the worst amongst G7 nations. 1 in 6 UK species are at risk of extinction. The government should be leading the role for nature for planet and people, but far too little is done. How can we tell others at COP16 what to do if we are falling so far behind? This Conservative government has missed its 2020 targets for sites of special scientific interest. It missed its targets for UK seas to meet good environmental status. It missed the targets for 75% of rivers and streams to be in good condition by 2027. Just 14% of surface waters are in good ecological condition in England and 0% in good overall condition. We Liberal Democrats would do a lot more. One of our priorities is to introduce a Nature Act to restore the natural environment through setting legally binding near and long-term targets for improving air, water, soil and biodiversity, supported by funding of at least £18 billion over the next 5 years. We would reverse the decline of nature by 2030 and double nature by 2050, increasing the protected area network from 8% of the land to at least 16%, doubling the area of the most important wildlife habitats across England, doubling the abundance of species in the UK from the current baseline, and funding local government to increase the network of local nature reserves to move to a more nature-friendly management policy for council land. Local government has a huge role to play, but can only be effective if resourced properly. I'm proud that my council in Bath was the first in the west of England to adopt a biodiversity net gain policy. Another of our Liberal Democrat policies is to introduce a Right to Nature Act. This would include a new Environment Rights Act, which would recognise everyone's human right to a healthy environment and guarantee access to environmental justice. Crucially, this would also introduce a duty of care for businesses to protect the environment. Particularly in our urban environments such as Bath, there's so much potential to unlock the potential for nature growth. Bath Organic Group Gardens exemplifies this benefit for community farming, for well-being and biodiversity. Liberal Democrats Council have also been leading the way on reducing pesticides. In July 2021, my council in Bath approved a ban on the use of glyphosate. The same year, Guildford Council passed a motion to become a pesticide-free town with cross-party support. Overuse of pesticides is destroying many areas wildlife used for food. We need national standards for limiting pesticides rather than relying on the work of local authorities. I recently had the pleasure of attending the St. Luke's Church Community Fair in Bath and met with many community nature groups. Friends of Bloomfield Thames for once, Friends of Sandpit Park. They both undertake conservation work to help improve nature in their local areas. And everyone, Ms. Rees, should be behind No Mow May. In the UK, we have lost 97% of British wildflower meadows since the 1930s, which is a vital source for food for pollinators such as bees and butterflies. May is the perfect time of the year to leave certain green areas to develop their natural wildflower and wildlife. It is not too late to reverse the decline in nature, but we must act now.
Lake.
Member for Brighton Pavilion for calling the debate today, which is a really important one. And while I think opinion is shifting, sometimes it is often forgotten that we face a twin climate and nature emergency. This debate is an important reminder that we can't tackle one without tackling the other. I'd also like to pay tribute to the Riverland Valley Conservation Group, who I had the privilege of visiting last Friday, to demonstrate their work to establish a baseline in that river. The Riverland Valley is a beautiful part of Sheffield, and these volunteers are playing a vital role in monitoring the health and biodiversity of the river, which unfortunately is blighted by a number of storm sewage overflows. And whilst it's the healthiest river in Sheffield, that does show you how far we do have to go to protect our incredibly important rivers. Citizen science like this is a testament to the value that my community and communities across the country place on the preservation and conservation of the environment and to the restoration of nature. But, Chair, these efforts are not being matched by the government. As others in this debate have said, the UK is one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world, with 1 in 6 species at risk of extinction. And when they are gone, they are truly gone. And yet the Office for Environmental Protection tells us that the government is not on track to deliver the nature recovery that we so desperately need. One of the key issues where the government is failing is land management. My constituency opens out into the Peak District and several peatland habitats. Our peatlands have been called Britain's rainforests, with landscapes covering 15% of the UK. Healthy peatlands are rare, fragile ecosystems, home to an abundance of wildlife. And as species champion for the hen harrier, I could talk about raptor persecution for this whole speech, but I want to focus, like others have, on the importance of these landscapes, because they're also carbon sinks, storing more carbon than all the forests in the UK, France and Germany put together. Damaged peatlands release carbon into the atmosphere and water emitting the same amount annually as the UK's entire aviation industry, deepening the climate emergencies. Colleagues may know that I've been campaigning to prevent heather burning on peatlands. The fires damage the peat and burn the moss that grows on top. The damage is really important, not only for nature, but also to prevent floods and help with natural flood mitigation. Rather than burns, we need to re-wet and restore our peatland ecologies so that they can thrive. And I think it's really important that we also recognise that more needs to be done to produce Britain's national biodiversity strategy and action plan. And I hope that this will happen and put on track the government's commitment to 30 by 30. But we need more than pledges. We need concrete plans and action. That is why I'm a firm supporter of the Climate and Nature Bill introduced by my friend and member for Leeds North West. The bill builds on the Climate and Ecology Bill tabled by myself and the member for Brighton Pavilion, and I hope that the government will take this seriously. If I had more time, I would continue, but I will stop there, Chair.
To serve with you in the chair, and I congratulate the honourable member for Brighton Pavilion for securing this important debate. England was once a country brimming with wildlife, from bees and butterflies to birds and beavers, but within a few generations everything has changed. Now time spent in the countryside is often a different experience. The landscape may be green, but it's all but empty. Biodiversity is decreasing. The World Wildlife Fund's Living Planet report in 2022 found that wildlife populations have decreased by an average of 69% in the last 50 years. Now, I'm proud to come from Somerset. The county is well known for its stunning nature and diverse range of landscapes, from the Mendip Hills to the Somerset Levels and moors. Somerset is also proud to be home to many farming communities, but we're really susceptible to the effects of climate change due to the county's low-lying moorland. We have witnessed heavy flooding over recent years, all having a devastating impact on our communities and our wildlife. Now, farming and biodiversity are intertwined. It's of utmost importance that hard-working farmers are supported in their efforts to protect and increase biodiversity. Intensive agriculture has been a key driver of biodiversity loss, but this must change. Part of tackling these problems begins by making sure British farmers get a fair deal and are adequately supported in their efforts to increase biodiversity. Because if British farms are financially secure, they can do more to protect nature. And that's why the Liberal Democrats would add £1 billion to the Elms budget to help farms and nature thrive. But communities are taking action, and I'm looking forward to the inaugural Land Alive Sustainable Food and Farming Conference being held at the Bath and West Showground in November. And I've met with many farmers across my constituency who have demonstrated to me the benefits biodiversity brings on their farms. For example, the protection of the shrill carder bee that was once widespread through the south of England is now limited to just 5 areas in my constituency around Somerton and Castle Carey. And recorded numbers highlight their decline, as just 7 were recorded in 2022. Bee numbers are affected by climate change, flooding, loss of genetic diversity and pesticide usage. And despite this fall in numbers, the government has authorised the emergency use of damaging neonic pesticides for the 4th year in a row. The National Pollinator Strategy is due for renewal this year, and I hope the government listen to the criticism of current strategy and implement a more comprehensive approach that considers the impact of all pollinator species. And I would also like to echo calls for a national invertebrate strategy. Habitat destruction is one of the greatest threats insects face. For instance, 97% of all flower-rich grassland has been lost in the last 50 years. But local action can be taken to restore diverse habitats. One such measure is the creation of a new 460-acre nature reserve near Bruton called Hill Somerset that aims to tackle the nature and climate crises while creating new jobs for local people and businesses along designing and delivering projects with the local community. This rewilding project will increase insect numbers, encourage growth of more plants, including new saplings, while bringing a greater abundance and diversity of species. And the Liberal Democrats want to support these types of initiatives by introducing a Nature Act that would restore the land natural environment by setting legally binding near-term and long-term targets for improving water, air and soil biodiversity. Ms Rees, protecting biodiversity requires action that protects and proliferates best practice among all who use the land. A rapid transition, one that supports British farmers, builds strong long-term food security, restores biodiversity, ensures we all reach net zero, our net zero targets is crucial.
Thank you. Kerry McCarthy.
It's a pleasure to see you in the chair as always, and I congratulate the Honourable Member from Brighton Pavilion for securing this debate. I'm sure both of us could spend hours in this chamber going through all the various aspects of biodiversity loss. I won't repeat what she says other than to say that I agree with, I think, almost all of it, possibly all of it. I'm very pleased that she mentioned the swift as the parliamentary species champion for the swift. I know that she shares my enthusiasm. And all around the country at the moment, there are local swifts groups welcoming their return. She will know that my sister runs the Save Wolverton Swifts group, and they had a party in the streets to welcome the swifts back last week. It really is an iconic species, and we must do all we can to restore its habitat. I wanted to focus, because obviously we're very pressed for time, on a few specific questions for the Minister. So we've heard that the Office of Environmental Protection in its annual report warned that the government remains largely off track to meet its environmental ambitions. It's largely on track for just a dismal 4 out of 40 of their environmental targets. And the conclusion was, put simply, it's not clear whether government's plans stack up. And this is, of course, very similar to the position that we're in at the moment in terms of the government's climate plans. They were taken to court just a couple of weeks ago, once again lost in the courts because their plans are inadequate. There was absolutely no point waxing lyrical about the ambitions and the targets unless there are plans to match it. And what I'm not quite clear about is what happens when the OEP issues such warnings about the inadequacy of the government's plans. Does that mean DEFRA now has to do better, and who is holding its feet to the fire? Or will it require court cases from organisations like Client Earth too? The other main thing that I wanted to focus on was about nature-based solutions to climate change. Huge benefit in terms of restoring biodiversity, helping with carbon sequestration, and I would echo what everyone has said about the huge importance of peatlands, which at the moment are releasing carbon into the atmosphere rather than sequestering it in the way that they could do because they're not being treated properly. We've got the issue of nutrient neutrality as well. The natural environment can play a huge role in climate adaptation with things like rewinding rivers, planting more trees in strategic places. What I'm not clear on is where the lead is on the government on these things. Biodiversity net gain will be absolutely crucial to this, but so will developing credible carbon markets, because all these things are co-benefits. So I would just end on that. Can the Minister tell us, is there cross-party, cross-departmental working so that we can ensure that we can get investment into nature-based solutions which will protect those natural environments in perpetuity, I would hope?
Thank you. Jim Shannon.
Madam Chair, It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. First of all, can I thank the Honourable Lady for Brighton Pavilion for bringing this forward. I've said it before, I've said it again. The Honourable Lady is the environmental conscience of us all in this House, and she brings forward issues which we all agree with and which we support. I don't always agree with everything, I have to say, but by the way, maybe we should just qualify that, you know. But I do say that there are many, many things that the Honourable Lady brings forward which I support, and thank her for that. It's also good news that the Government is committed to halt the decline in species abundance and protect 30% of land and sea by 2030. Similarly, Madam Chair, to our net zero targets, we must ensure the correct strategies are in place to achieve this. So I'm here to discuss how back home Northern Ireland can play its part, and I always bring a Northern Ireland perspective to these debates. Ever mindful that the Minister doesn't have responsibility for Northern Ireland, but it's how we can work together, because I believe in this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland working together to achieve many goals which are helpful for us all. At the end of 2023, it was revealed that Northern Ireland is one of the most nature-depleted areas in the world, according to the 2023 State of Nature report. And this has also shocked, Madam Chair, to learn that 12% of species as accessed or assessed across Northern Ireland are under threat of extinction, which is what this debate is about, and the Honourable Lady has set the scene very, very well. The report also revealed that the abundance of farmland bird species has on average fallen by 43% since 1996, and it's also found a 14% decrease in the number of flowering plants in Northern Ireland since 1973. So there are lots for us to do in Northern Ireland, and we have some targets which the department back home, DERA, can try to achieve. Amongst the species that have been identified as a risk of extinction are the basking shark, the Atlantic salmon and the Irish damselfly, the first two being native to Northern Ireland waters and also to the Republic. We have been hearing recently, Madam Chair, about the blue-green algae appearing in Northern Ireland waters, in Lough Neagh in particular, and the threat that gives to the biggest freshwater lake in the UK has been severely affected. Having healthy seas will help to regulate climate and reduce the negative impacts, and I represent a fairly coastal and agricultural constituency of Strangford, which is full of biodiversity. And this is why I'm a great supporter in preserving nature and taking those small but very necessary steps to protect it. There needs to be a joint approach and an effort throughout the United Kingdom and further afield to do so. I declare an interest, Madam Chair, as a landowner and a member of the Ulster Farmers Union. We have planted on our land and our farm some 3,500 trees, created 2 ponds for habitat, retain the hedgerows and make sure that the young birds and butterflies and insects can thrive. We've also controlled, and we have to control the magpies, control the crows and control the foxes. It's about keeping the balance, so we try to keep that balance in the countryside, and we believe that we're doing that hopefully fairly well. I've also had involved with a project for the black bees. It's Irish black bees. They're almost extinct, but they're coming back, and Roger, Chris and Valentine Hodges, I should say, are the people who have been instrumental in that. So there's 3 estates close to us have been used that. We have to have them on our farm as well. So the black bees, the Irish black bees, are coming back because people are making an effort. Having sustainable habitats protect species as they have the environmental conditions and resources needed to survive. It's understood that DEFRA here is going to restore, or is on a target to create and restore some 500,000 hectares of wildlife. Rich habitats. We've seen this year, especially, Madam Chair, a drastic increase in the amount of rainfall. Of course, the last 3 months, Madam Chair, the rainfall has been enormous, but normally it isn't. The other couple of years haven't been. So changing weather patterns also alter the seasonal timing of certain species' life cycles and can lead to ecological mismatches. The habitat loss, the level rise will affect coastal habitats through saltwater intrusion and erosion. And to conclude, Madam Chair, there are recommendations for improvement which include setting targets we can meet, ensuring robust monitoring and coordinating a joint approach across the whole of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland to ensure as a collective we can tackle biodiversity loss. So I praise the Honourable Lady for Brighton Pavilion for the work she has done in relation to this. And I'm keen to learn more about what steps we can take to preserve nature in all this, and so I look to the Minister for answers on how we can do it much better. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'd like to, before I call Alex Sobel, I'd just like to thank all backbench speakers for sticking within the informal time limit. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Alex Sobel.
Thank you, Ms. Rees. It's a pleasure to serve under your chair. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Brighton Pavilion for securing this debate, and also for mentioning and supporting my Climate and Nature Bill, which gets its second reading on Friday, and to my honourable friend from Sheffield Hallam for bringing forward the Climate and Ecology Bill, on which the Climate and Nature Bill is an iteration of. And I'm sure if I'm not successful on Friday, we will see future iterations of this bill going forward, as there's so much support across the House. The COVID-19 pandemic laid bare the interdependence of people and nature. It's no longer possible to deny the fact that human health is linked to our use and abuse of the environment. The biodiversity crisis is a cultural, social and economic one. As humans, we're not simply observers of nature, we're an integral part of it. We need an approach that collaborates across departments, sectors and nations to even begin to save our natural environment.
Will you give way very quickly? Does he agree that people understand a lot more about the nature concept of net zero, and therefore combining net zero with nature loss is so important in order to bring people emotionally on our side?
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Bath, who serves alongside me in the APPG for Net Zero, where we look at these particular issues, and she has foreshadowed what I was going to say next. Nature is essential to all people's future, and yet environmental degradation occurs disproportionately in or around low-income areas where a high percentage of people of colour live. We must ensure that our approach ensures a thriving natural environment for all people. You probably know that I have a long history of raising insects. In fact, I brought forward the first insect population loss debate in 2019 in this chamber. I think the Minister responded on that occasion as well. I wanted to call it Insectageddon. Unfortunately, the House authorities would not allow such a title. But in terms of the position of insect loss, we are sadly in the same position. The decline in insect population, one of the lesser-known tragedies of the human effect on the environment. Where insects go, all other species follow. Let's not mince our words. The rise in human population, loss of pollinating insects, sets us on a road of cyclical starvation. We will lose the production of some crops, particularly those best for people's health and well-being. The role that insects play in food security is completely pivotal. Dung beetles, for example, save the cattle industry an estimated £367 million a year. The National Pollinator Strategy is set to be updated this year. There's been a successful educational piece on the role of bees, how bees have in food security. We need this to go further, to highlight the impact that invertebrates have too, and I hope the Minister can address that point. Education will also be central to mending the heartbreaking lack of care that humans have for the natural environment. There are countless young people in particular who've shown outstanding leadership in this area, and I thank them for their bravery. Lots of organisations, in fact the EAC on which I used to sit, have noted the changes can be made in the school curriculum. For example, a new GCSE in natural history that would teach children and young people skills in observing, naming and recording nature. We know there is a significant skills gap in ecology, which means that devolved and local authorities simply not be able to prevent further losses, let alone increase biodiversity. By adding this GCSE into the curriculum, which is set out to be in place by 2025, will create this skilled workforce and go into jobs in the natural world. The practical skills that curriculum and skills initiatives provide are just one side of what we need to be talking about when we say nature education. The second is encouraging people, not just young people, but the whole population to experience, celebrate and learn about nature in a holistic way. People are spending less and less time outdoors. We know this lack of connection results in a lack of appreciation and value placed on nature. We can do this in many ways, by improving access to nature in both urban and rural settings, expanding initiatives like forest education schools, particularly in areas of high deprivation where we know children virtually never visit the environment, and actually building on this we can create a national nature service so young people get to experience those nature jobs and think about working in ecology in the broadest sense. I spoke briefly about tackling green skills shortages under the remit of nature education, but the UK must now set exactly how it will fund these skill shortages. No matter how many well-intentioned speeches we hear about the need to create green jobs, if there are no proper financial incentives to address this, then devolved and local authorities will simply not be able to help reach our 2030 goals that we signed up to in Kunming, Montreal. We cannot decouple the crisis that the natural world faces and the economic crisis and the climate crisis. Economies are embedded in nature rather than external to it. When we recognise this, it becomes blatantly obvious that bleating nature risks the health and well-being of everyone. What this demands then is a fundamental transformational change of how we measure economic success. Currently, GDP does not take into account a depreciation of natural assets, the natural environment being our key decider of future success. If we do not move into inclusive wealth measurement, we will continue running ourselves to the ground, destroying more and more of the natural environment. At their core, economies do not value the natural world and therefore cannot address biodiversity loss. People should have the right to experience the benefits of nature and a healthy environment, and the right to play a meaningful role in storing and protecting that environment. The crises we are facing, mental health, food shortages, conflicts, social and economic equality, are all connected, and they all have nature as a key intersection. We must tackle the nature crisis. Thank you.
Person Stephen Bonner.
Thank you very much, Ms Rees. It's always a pleasure to see you in the chair this morning, being no different. And thanks also to the Honourable Member for Brighton Pavilion for securing this important debate for us today on biodiversity loss. We can be in no doubt that biodiversity loss and the biodiversity emergency are intrinsically linked with the climate crisis. Scotland's outstanding natural environment is one of our country's greatest assets and something that every Scot is rightly proud of, and we must do everything we possibly can to protect it. Our nature attracts millions of visitors each and every year and supports our exports of high-quality produce and, of course, protects those who produce it for us. Maintaining this resource is vital to Scotland's continued success, and it is critical that we manage the water environment to ensure that the needs of society, economy and environment can be met and maintained for future generations to come. Restoring this natural environment is a key way to address the twin challenges of nature loss and climate change, and that includes many of the interventions championed by the Scottish Rewilding Alliance, who are doing some fantastic work up the road. The SNP's £65 million Nature Restoration Fund has committed nearly £40 million since 2021 to unlock the full potential that nature restoration projects can bring to local communities. The fund has supported local businesses to boost nature tourism, help landowners with pollinator projects and to boost local food production, and supports river and woodland restoration. In the last 5 years alone, Scotland has contributed to around 75% of all new woodlands across the United Kingdom. Scotland's stunning national parks also bring significant benefits to the local communities they serve through collaborative working to support thriving local economies, maximising the benefits of the environment, the climate, the economy and the local people. In 2022, nearly £450 million was generated in local economies through visitor and tourism businesses. Our parks also play a key role in supporting our farmers and crofters, working with them to develop and deliver collaborative, nature-friendly, carbon-neutral projects and practices. Ms Chair, the SNP Scottish Government's recently published Scottish Biodiversity Strategy sets out how key sectors will deliver for biodiversity loss, including in planning, agriculture, forestry and indeed water management. This delivery plan sets out the actions needed to halt biodiversity loss by 2030 and reverse those declines by 2045, with action needed across a whole range of government, business and, of course, local society. The plan presents a nature-positive vision for Scotland, one where biodiversity is regenerating and underpinning a healthy and thriving economy and society, and playing that key role is so required in addressing climate change. The SBS will be implemented through a series of delivery plans covering a 5-year period. Scotland's rivers define our iconic landscapes. From mountain tributaries to estuaries flowing into the oceans, they provide vital water and rich habitats and help us to adapt to global threats, including that climate change and water scarcity. The SNP have many innovative initiatives underway in Scotland to nurture, improve and protect our rivers. Since 2021, the Scottish Government's Restoration Fund has awarded in excess of £2.3 million for projects to restore and revive our river habitats and to improve their resilience to climate change. We are working closely with partners to develop integrated catchment management techniques to restore rivers and to improve natural flood management restrictions. Over the past decade, Scottish Water has reduced environmental pollution incidents by 60%, and that's down from 800 to 300 this year, despite increasing challenges and weather patterns. They have also invested £880 million on targeted improvements to environmental quality. And we must be clear, Scotland remains fully committed to achieving our net zero targets by 2045. We are already around halfway there and continue to decarbonise faster than the UK average, and the SNP are utterly focused and committed to tackling this climate emergency. The Climate Change Committee of the Scottish Parliament has advised, of course, that the 2030 target set by Parliament is beyond what we consider to be achievable. It is disappointing news. However, their latest report also contains much to be proud of. Scotland has made strong progress to date, with emissions cut in half and decarbonising, as I said, faster than the UK average. Between 1990 and 2021, Scotland's emissions halved while the economy grew by 57%. So this clearly demonstrates that a thriving economy and falling emissions are not just compatible, they can actually support each other. So we will continue to help businesses and investors through development of a new green industrial strategy so that the people of Scotland can share in the enormous economic opportunities of the global transition to net zero. By contrast, Madam Chair, the UK Government is indeed falling behind in the global race to reap the economic benefits of the race to net zero, and has failed to rise to the challenges that have been set by the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States and those set by our European partners. Also, we need together, collectively, to seize the opportunity to reaffirm our commitment, implement the robust measures that are required, and time to lead by example in the fight to preserve our planet's biodiversity. Thank you.
And spokesperson Toby Perkins.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Ms Rees. Great pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd like to start by congratulating the Honourable Member for Brighton Pavilion for securing this much-needed debate, and indeed for the recent publication of her book on this issue. I'm not sure whether this will be the last time I get an opportunity to respond to the Honourable Lady, so if I can just congratulate her for the contribution she's made over the 14 years that she's been here, and wish her very much well with all that she does in the future. I think it's been an incredibly important and valuable debate. I'm really grateful to everyone who's contributed to it, and I think that the very fact that we've had to limit the amount of time that people have been able to speak shows that this is a subject that enjoys a great deal of interest in this place, and indeed we could have had a debate, I'm sure, twice as long and still have much more to stay. So it has been incredibly valuable. I'd like to reflect upon a few of the contributions that have been made, both at the start and also as I go through my contribution. The Honourable Lady from Brighton Pavilion made the crucial point that we are inextricably linked to nature, that the success of the human race and the success of our natural environment go absolutely hand in hand. We shouldn't see these as conflicting or contradictory, but indeed the approach that the Labour Party will take and that we must all take as a society is to see the need for us to work together. She also made the point about particularly the reintroduction of beavers, and that's something that I feel personally very strongly about, and I think it's something that we need to see greater focus on alongside. We had a very interesting debate yesterday on species decline, and that is just one area. The Honourable Lady from Chipping Barnet, undaunted by being the only substantive Conservative backbench contribution, did make a number of important points. One of those was to reflect on the importance of the Environment Act. And I think one of the points that was coming across very strongly in this debate is that it's all very well to have targets, but if you have legally binding targets you don't achieve, ultimately they become simply a fig leaf to cover the lack of performance and activity of the government. But she also made the point about the importance of the British overseas territories, and it's a very important point that I don't think other people made, but was certainly made strongly yesterday, and is one that needs to be taken seriously. I'll give way briefly to the Honourable Lady.
I thank him for giving way. I've just been at an infrastructure committee meeting, and there the point was made: the government can actually break the law. Would the Prime Minister go to court? No, they wouldn't. So we need a government that is seriously committed to the targets that we are setting ourselves and that we put into law, not just sort of paying lip service to it.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for that point. I'm going to say more on COP shortly, but I think it is incredibly important, and I think it would be hugely damaging if, as a result of the Prime Minister's kind of endless delaying of this general election, if Britain's contribution to COP16 became lost in amongst the general election. It could be sort of similar timing. And so I will be pressing the Minister about what the government's approach to that will be. As many colleagues have rightly noted, our country is now one of the most nature depleted in the world, and this has devastating consequences for all of us. My honourable friend from Mid-Bedfordshire reflected on the fact not a single river in Britain is in good condition. And also on rivers, my honourable friend from Sheffield Hallam spoke about the positive work that's being done in the River Lynn Valley in her area, but also the challenges that people passionate about keeping that river in a high quality are facing. As we move forward, I'm sure when the Minister responds, she'll point, as she did yesterday, to the binding targets of the Environment Act. And we're constantly told how groundbreaking they are. But I'm sorry to say that setting legally binding targets that the government then fails to meet is not a cause for a lack of honour. And my honourable friend from Bristol East, I think, asked some very important questions there. What is, in the event that we have legally binding targets, what is the response of government, and indeed what are the opportunities for people to hold the government to account if they fail to make those targets by 2030, and indeed if, as they are currently, they are not on track to achieve those targets? What is the purpose of a legally binding target that a government then goes on to miss? 1 in 6 species in the United Kingdom are at risk of extinction. And it was other people referred to the Office for Environmental Protection's report that the government is off track to meet all of its commitments on nature and the environment, including its goals to halt biodiversity loss. Now, the biodiversity targets agreed at COP10 were missed by a country mile, and we are yet to see the government's plan for meeting the Montreal framework targets agreed at COP15. We have just 3% of land and 8% of our seas currently protected for nature, and so it is crucial that the government's plans live up to the size of this moment. My honourable friend from Croydon North has set out Labour's commitment to the targets in the Environment Act, and we will look to deliver where the Conservatives have failed, including halting the decline of British species by 2030 and being committed to honouring the international agreement to protect 30% of the UK's land and seas for nature by 2030. But we must be clear, our country cannot achieve the targets that have been set by continuing on the course that is currently charting. Labour will review the Environment Improvement Plan and take steps to get Britain back on track. The Honourable Member for Strangford spoke about the importance of habitats like wetlands, peat bogs, forests, both for families to explore, for wildlife to thrive, and having those nature-rich environments at the forefront of our mind is very much within Labour's approach to this. Now, the government has a target to bring 70,000 hectares of ancient woodland in timber plantations into restoration by 2030. That's an ambitious target. We support it. Last year, they brought just 1 hectare of these irreplaceable habitats into restoration. It is simply not good enough, and we are not, as a country, on target for what we have already committed to. Farmers are the custodians of habitats in all four corners of the United Kingdom. They know and cherish the land they work like nobody else, and in many cases they ploughed the same furrow for generations. The Labour Party respects the crucial role played by farmers and farming communities, and government must do much more to support farmers moving to different practices that carve out a role for nature alongside their crucial role of food production. Several members mentioned about the failure of the Environment Land Management Scheme, and indeed some suggested more money needed to be put into that. The truth is the government aren't even spending the money that they've currently allocated. So in terms of my job, going to the Treasury demanding more money for things like the Environment Land Management Scheme, the first response you're going to get is, well, spend the money that you've got currently. And so that is going to be the number one priority for a future Labour government. The numbers of farmland burns have reduced by 50% since 1970, whilst more than a third of nutrient pollution in rivers is caused by agricultural runoff, making it all the more insane that we have all this money in the Environment Land Management Scheme budget that's being unspent. Farmers want to make these changes. They value the natural environments in which they live and work, but they often face impossible choices. This year we've seen crops washed away, farmhouses become islands in torrential downpour. A staggering 82% of respondents to the NFU survey said their farm business had suffered negatively owing to the weather, and yet the government's response has been far too pedestrian for the size of the crisis facing farmers. Ensuring that ELM scheme delivers for farmers will be a crucial priority, as the Honourable Lady from Somerton and Frome reflected a few moments ago. So can the Minister explain why so much money allocated for farming transition is being sent back to the Treasury unspent? And can she confirm whether the government will publish this land use framework before the general election? As my honourable friend from Mid-Bedfordshire reflected, I stand here proud to represent the party that created national parks 75 years ago. It's an achievement that shows the progressive changes that only a Labour government can deliver. However, a recent report published by the Campaign for National Parks found that just 6% of land in national parks is being managed effectively for nature. At the same time, only a third of sites of special scientific interest, as the Honourable Lady from Bath commented, are currently in good condition, and these sites are actually in worse condition than national parks. It's utterly perverse and reflects a failure of policy and a betrayal of the intentions set out by that post-war Labour administration. Protected sites ought to be where nature particularly thrives and must be the cornerstone of any strategy to restore biodiversity in the UK. The nature crisis is a global crisis, my honourable friend from Leeds North West said, and we must be clear about the need to collaborate with international partners. The UK played a positive role in making sure the crucial commitment to nature's recovery enshrined in the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity framework was brought to reality. And this is where the UK should be, a leader on the global stage where it comes to environment and nature. I have to say, under the current Prime Minister, there's been far less commitment than there was under Boris Johnson. Since Montreal, the government has shown very little interest in making good on this momentum. It's failed to deliver its targets domestically or on the international stage. A Labour government will take on this mantle, driving international agreement and collaboration. So will the government treat the forthcoming COP16 with the urgency and the seriousness that it warrants? Does the Minister agree that it would be a tragedy if one of the impacts of the delayed general election was that Britain was not focused on its contribution to Colombia because it coincided with the general election campaign? The need to tackle this crisis is urgent. Under Labour, we will have a government that recommits to the environment improvement plan targets, tackles the failure in our water industry, supports farmers to provide their crucial role in a way that boosts and not depletes nature, grow nature-rich habitats, get the Environment Land Management Scheme working, and ends the failure that sees too much unspent. Finally, bring forward that land use framework and support farmers and communities through the creation of a flood resilience task force. Change is coming, Ms Rees. It can't come a moment too soon.
Thank you very much, Chair, and a pleasure to have you in the chair today, keeping everyone to their time. So excellent. Look, first of all, I've got to thank the Honourable Member from Brighton Pavilion for bringing this debate. I expect no less of her. This is the kind of subject that we've heard her speaking about the whole time that I certainly have been in Parliament. And whilst we have our differences, we have certainly had a great deal in common over all these years. So I want to thank her for her work as she leaves this place and get that absolutely on the record. And there is, as I said in yesterday's debate, we had an impassioned debate on biodiversity here yesterday, and we did have a great many Conservative colleagues here speaking yesterday. And it was a very, very full debate, as has today's been. And certainly, whilst we have our differences, I think we're all singing from the hymn sheet of loving nature, knowing how it is intrinsically part of how we live, how you can't deal with the climate crisis and climate adaptation without tackling biodiversity and nature. I think that's a given, and something I have worked on since I've been in Parliament, and was interested on the honourable gentleman from Leeds North, West, holding the first debate on insects. I held the first debate on soil in this place, of which I'm very, very proud. And that's firmly embedded on the agenda now. We're paying farmers to look after their soil. So I think we have made so much progress. And we know that half the world, the global economy, depends on nature and biodiversity. And there are many other reasons for looking after it, but that one is very important. And we've all had very stark stats about the disaster. We know that. So that's why we've got to do something about it. It's not, shall we do something about biodiversity? It is an absolute must. And I know that the Honourable Member from Brighton Pavilion said that she called for we'd called for a decade of action. She was suggesting that nothing had happened and it was all terribly negative. Well, actually, I would say, has she been listening? I would say that we have made absolutely enormous progress in the last decade on this agenda, both at home and on the international stage, because one can't do one without the other. And the critical thing is that what this government has done, and I would say it's done more than any other government, it's set the framework that we've got to have. We can't tackle this with individual itsy-bitsy pots. We have to have a framework, and that's why it was so important to bring through the Environment Act. Many of us here were involved in that act. It is a globally changing act. No other government has produced an act like this. And that sets the framework. We've passed legislation to protect our environment. We have legislated and set a target for restoring nature by 2030. And one can criticise it all one likes. It's very challenging, but it is a legally binding target. We have 4 legally binding biodiversity targets. We also have legally binding tree targets and a number of other areas like water and air. So the structure is there, as is the framework of how we're going to get there. I will quickly give way to my honourable friend.
And I thank her for her kind comments very, very genuinely. But a number of us have made the point again and again that targets on their own aren't sufficient if we're not actually meeting them. And it's not just us in this room that are saying this. Her own watchdog, the Office of Environmental Protection, is saying very clearly that we are only on target for 4 out of 40, and they've said the prospects of meeting targets and commitments are largely off track. So I would put it to her that yes, some progress has been made, but overall we are massively off track, and her tone does frankly strike me as rather complacent.
Well, I've got to take issue with that, because actually what I'm trying to say, we've got the framework in place, we've got the targets, and the OEP did come out with a somewhat critical report, but what I would say about that, it was based on some evidence. They'll have better evidence next time. We're going to produce the next Environment Improvement Plan in the summer. That'll only be the second one. You know, this is tricky, this is complicated, she'll know that. We've got teams of people working in DEFRA, biodiversity experts, all the scientists feeding in, on whether those are the right targets, on how we're going to hit the targets, and advising us on how to set the policies to get to the targets. So there's a huge amount of work feeding into that, and we're working closely actually with the OEP to make sure they've got the right data and evidence so that they can see the trajectory to the targets. I'm not saying it's easy, but we've got the plan. What I want to go on to talk about is some of the things that we are doing so that we will make progress. We are tackling, so we have to tackle this from every angle. So, for example, we've got to create and restore habitats and connect wildlife-rich habitats. We've got to tackle the pressures on biodiversity and pollution, and we've got to take action for species. So we've got an overall nature recovery plan that's for large-scale habitat creation, and that has a number of schemes that are helping to build on that. This is what Natural England are working on, and nature-based solutions are a very big part of that. That was raised, that's very important. Just last year, we launched a new fund for 25 million for nature-based solution projects, but we are using nature-based solutions in a whole range of ways, for flood control, for biodiversity, for sequestration, and there's a huge amount of work going on that. And actually, the Honourable Member from Chipping Barnet recognised that the complexities, the need to look at this from every single angle. And that's why, as many have said today, our farmers are so important. They do farm 70% of our land, our farmers and landowners. We had a really successful farm to fork event yesterday, Chair, in number 10. Really positive outcomes, with the farmers understanding their role in producing sustainable, secure food supplies, but linking it to environmental recovery and protection. And that's what all of our new schemes are completely focused on. And they are world-leading. Thank you. I will give way.
I really thank the Minister for giving way. I mean, one of the most alarming aspects of the nature crisis is the collapse in insect populations. So it would be really good to understand from the Minister the key things the government is doing on this, including through the ELM scheme.
Minister?
Yes, I thank her for that, and of course that's been raised by many. We do have a whole bee unit actually in DEFRA working on this with our bee pollinator strategy and the work even on invasives like the Asian hornet, for example. We have to tackle all those issues. But that's why integrated pest management is one of the planks of the new Sustainable Farming Initiative. And that is paying farmers to do other things so they don't have to use pesticides. Biocontrols. I mean, I do it in my own garden because I garden organically, but it's on a big scale. And also harnessing technology and innovation. So if one had to spray, just a spot spray. So all of this technology is moving forward, and farmers are moving with us and being paid to do it. And we've guaranteed the funds that they got from the Common Agricultural Policy. I mean, she was there when we announced we were going to do all these new schemes in DEFRA. And that gave us a huge opportunity to do something completely different, having left the CAP. And it's underway, and actually our SFR, we've had 22,000 farmers sign up to that already. It is the most successful scheme DEFRA's ever run, and it will increase. And countryside stewardship is still running. We've increased the payments there. We're looking all the time at how these actions are going to operate, what we need to deliver those targets. So I'd say to my honourable friend from Brighton Pavilion that we are looking at this all the time and feeding in to work out how we can hit the targets and deliver the food. That is very much what we're doing. Peatland was mentioned by the Honourable Member from Strangford, and peat areas are hugely degraded. We know that's one of the areas that we've got to focus on, so we've had a special fund for that. That comes out of our Nature for Climate Fund. We had a target to restore 35,000 hectares by 2030. We've already done 27,000 hectares. There's great projects going on all over the country, including Somerset. Somerset and the Somerset Wildlife Trust have had huge benefit from millions of pounds of these funds. They're doing good work, but they're working with the farmers and the government to restore these really, really precious environments. And we need to do more. We've also had our species survival fund. So there are some individual species, of course, that need very special habitat. So we've got a special fund for them, and we've already seen habitat. We're restoring habitat that area the size of York, you know, to deal with certain species on chalk rivers, coasts, coastal marshes, plains, and in Dorset. I went to Bucklebury Common and saw a heathland being restored where they are getting back adders and nightjars. So with the right management, we are getting these creatures coming back. National nature reserves were mentioned. Yes, they are a cornerstone. They're critical to delivering our target of 30% of protected land. We've got 290 national nature reserves, but just in 23 and 24 we created another 3, Chair, and there are another 3 on the cards. And these are really cornerstones, with largely the farmers working in them as well, helping us to deliver nature. I would say to our Scottish friends, perhaps they could look, and they tell us how good they are on biodiversity, look at why they've cut their tree planting grants so enormously, and that's going to have a huge effect in Scotland. We've got local other things, other measures. Local nature recovery strategies are being worked on. They're going to help us inform where we want the nature, what should go where. They're underway. And biodiversity net gain is an absolute game changer. And this, again, is globally leading to legislate so that every development has to put back 10% more nature than was there when they started, is a real game changer. And I must mention swift bricks, because I'm a huge swift lover as well. Actually, yellow hammers are one of my favourite birds, and we're getting them back through our hedgerow protections we've just introduced. But Honourable Member makes very good points about swift bricks. So we've been talking to Dulac about this, about getting it in. Many developers are already doing swift bricks. And I would say to, I think the Honourable Member from Somerton and Free mentioned it, you know, her own planning authority could actually specify that they want developments to have swift bricks. So these things can be done already, and I would urge people to do them. And just also on swift bricks, there is a biodiversity metric. That is how the developers work out what gain, how they work out the gain, the biodiversity net gain that they've got to add. So we're asking them, they are looking at swift bricks about whether that, you know, for example, how many points that would get in the metric, to see if they can get that into the net gain tool. So that is definitely a piece of work that's underway, and I will give way.
Yeah, really quick. I didn't want to miss the question from the Honourable Lady from Bristol East. She keeps referring to legally binding targets. In the event the government doesn't meet those legally binding targets, what happens?
I thank you for that. Well, the point is we do have legally binding targets, and we do have a remit to report on them. So everything we're doing is so that we can drive towards our targets. And we have targets, don't we? We have carbon budgets. We report all the time. That's how we work, and we will aim to hit our targets. And the OEP will hold us to account on that. And don't forget, it was this government that actually set up the Office for Environmental Protection to have a body to hold us to account. That, again, is a game changer. So I wanted to just talk, we got something called a species abundance indicator, which is the piece of official statistic that is telling us how we're doing on our species, and we need that so that we can work out how we are getting to our targets. We published the official statistic in last Friday. I would urge people to have a look at that. This is a very, very complicated tool, and it covers 670 species used as indicators for how we're doing on our targets. And it's informed by an expert committee. And what it does say, whilst there are real problems, it actually said that the indicators are showing promising progress towards levelling off. So that was announced just last week, and I would urge members and friends to have a look at that. I wanted to just get to the international stage, which everybody's mentioned, is absolutely critical, and we are considered as world leaders working on the international stage, and many here have taken part in the various COPs. And we have got COP16 coming up. It was actually the UK, of course, who was at the forefront of those international efforts to agree the landmark Kunming-Montreal global biodiversity framework to halt and reverse biodiversity. And we've also, legislated to halt and reverse biodiversity in this country. And I think we are putting our money where our mouth is. Nobody's saying it's easy. We're working on our UK biodiversity strategy right now. It should be published in the summer. And actually, the OTs are part of that. That was mentioned as well. They are a really important part of our nature. And they contain 94% of our nature. So we're working. I chaired a meeting just yesterday with all of the OTs, even as far as Pitcairn Island and St Helena. All joined this meeting because they're all working on their biodiversity strategies, and we'll put those together and they will be published. and the action plan that was mentioned, the UK National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, many mentioned, which will be published imminently. I would just say this is UK-wide, and the DAs have to play their part. They have to agree their bit. I just put that out there, okay? This is important, and we want to get it out. Very important. And also, I must just touch, before I finish, on finance. Climate finance, international nature finance, is critical. We can't do any of this without getting that right. We have a green finance strategy across government. A question was asked about whether we worked across government, and we are working on how you get the funding, the nature funding flowing around the world, and we have already committed 11 billion on our climate finance commitment. So I'm going to wind up there, apart from to say that oil and gas was raised, and of course 47% of our energy last year came from renewables. It's been an enormous shift in what's happened under this government. So I'd like to thank everyone for taking part. We understand it's a crisis, but I will put it out there that this government has set us on the pathway for addressing it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Karen Lucas, you have just under a minute.
Yes, which is not enough, Ms Rees, to be able to respond to what I've heard. I want to thank all honourable members for sharing their concerns. I think there are some real key themes that have come up again and again. One is, if I can just pick out around peatlands and why on earth we're still setting fire to peat. That makes no sense at all. Could we please take that away? We've talked a lot about targets, but not about delivery plans to actually meet those targets, and still no answer as far as I could hear about what happens when legally binding targets aren't met. I don't know if that means we'd have to take the government to court again. It's getting a bit of a routine, but if necessary, I'm sure it will be done. I want to make sure that we don't have fossil fuel extraction in marine protected areas. Again, that just seems madness. And at the end of the day, I wanted to take back to her department and across government that this is so urgent and that there is, I know she cares about it, but there is complacency. That needs to be addressed. We need urgent action, and we need it now.
Would members please leave as quickly as they could? We need to get on to the next debate. Thank you.